everyone. So we will learn about metacognitive knowledge in relation to distributed practice and retrieval practice in this video. So to start, metacognitive knowledge is just a fancy term for knowledge on study strategies and their applications. So here we have a table of learning techniques and a description of what they are and how to employ them. Don't worry, this table will be on the next slide as well. So how can we study effectively? Effective study strategies include distributed practice and retrieval practice. So make sure to focus on those two. And ineffective ones include rereading or marking, which includes highlighting or underlining. So you might want to pause the video and just read through practice testing and distributed practice. So before we start talking about retrieval practice, pause the video again and keep these guiding questions in mind. So what is retrieval practice, benefits, etc. To start off, let's answer the question of what exactly retrieval practice is. So retrieval practice is the process of retrieving information from your memory storage. Specifically in this video, we'll focus on practice testing, which includes low to no stake self-testing. What does that mean? Well, low to no stake meaning it's not in school and it's not done for a grade. It's merely practice you're doing at home. For example, making yourself your own practice test or quiz, and you're doing this in order to study for an actual exam. And additionally, retrieval practice has consistently outperformed rereading or restudying. This is because rereading, by rereading more, you're getting more familiar with the text. However, you may not be actually adequately learning the text. So you think you understand, but you may not actually be able to answer questions based on it correctly. So thus, you would probably benefit more from practice testing. As you can see from this graph, practice testing has consistently outperformed restudying in every single experiment based on both facts and concepts. Moving on to the different types of retrieval practice. So on this side, you have the various types of retrieval practice followed by examples over here. So free recall, you would ask yourself to test yourself based on a list. Fill in the blank it's kind of self-explanatory. You fill in the blank and you may include definition here. Cued recall is definitely used with word pairs. So for example, if you're learning a language, you'd have the English word and the Spanish word, something like that. And recognition, for example, multiple choice, I feel like we're all familiar with, be a question up here and various answer choices below. So how can you actually employ these strategies? You can do practice tests, perhaps at the end of a textbook chapter, take practice tests, for example, on College Board, use the Cornell note-taking method so you can then test yourself with the Cornell notes, and or make flashcards either on Quizlet virtually or make paper flashcards. So for example, here would be the Cornell note-taking method. So you have your guiding questions here, and you would write this as you read through your textbook chapter or during class. And then on the right side, you would have your notes. So then when you study it and you go back to your notes, you would ask yourself this guiding question, and then you try to brainstorm the answer. And you would actually look on the notes section to check after you have done this exercise. On the other hand, you can use Quizlet or just make, physical flashcards, and you have a question on one side and the definition on the other. Or if you would like to use things that are already provided for you. So this is the end of a textbook chapter, and you would have multiple choice questions that are provided for you. And there is even short response questions here. So look through your textbook chapters. Okay. Going back to the slides. So for optimal benefits, they have mixed results. However, this is what I've synthesized from my research. So you want to be using free recall or multiple choice questions, although it doesn't matter if the structure of your practice test doesn't exactly match the actual test 100%. So for example, studies have shown that if you use free recall in terms of your practice test, you would still do well and the benefits will still be retained, even if the test is actually multiple choice. However, more generative practice tests, such as free recall, are definitely beneficial. Additionally, in terms of dosage or how many times you would take the test, the simple answer is more is better. However, this would depend on the spacing, because if we would take a lot of tests in succession, that might lead to burnout. So you want to take a lot of tests, however, you want to space them um, as long as possible. So for example, you might do a practice test on Monday and then space it for as long as possible. Let's say that day is Wednesday. And then you would then take another test on Friday to prepare for your test on, let's say, the next Monday. So additionally, feedback is very important to protect against, they say, preservation errors. And that means when you first take a practice test, you may get a lot of questions incorrect. And that's fine as long as you include feedback. So that would mean you would go over the questions and check to make sure, check your questions. So you got let's say you got question number 1 incorrect, you got question number 2 correct, etc. And kind of look into the reason why you got those questions wrong. And studies have shown that feedback, especially if it's delayed, so not directly after the test, but you could should wait a day or two and then get feedback for your practice test, that would lead to optimal benefits. Moving on to why retrieval practice works, I won't spend too much time on this slide because this isn't as relevant to how you would use study strategies, but definitely read through this if you're interested on how it works. Okay, so we're moving on to distributed practice now. So these are a few guiding questions to, again, keep in mind as we go through the slides. So first of all, distributed practice versus massed practice. Distributed practice is if you're to learn, distribute your learning over a course of time. So for example, let's say, again, have a test on next Monday and you have the whole school week to study for it. Let's say you study for 30 minutes on Monday, and then you study for 30 minutes on Tuesday, and then perhaps you say you didn't have time Wednesday or Thursday, but then you study for 30 minutes on Friday. That is equivalent to 90 minutes of studying in total, and all done before your test on Monday. However, if you were to engage in mass practice, you would cram all of the material that you need to learn in one study session. So before your test on Monday, for example, let's say on Sunday evening, you go through all the content and you pull a whole 1 hour, 30-minute study session. That would be massed practice. And according to research, if you were to study according to massed practice, meaning no study spacing between sessions, by your second study session, you would have retained most of the information. However, by the end of 30 days for, let's say, a final test, you would have performed worse than all the other conditions. On the other hand, if you were to have studied and have your sessions spaced out with a time of 30 days in between each study session, by the second session, you would have almost forgotten everything. But this is really crucial because although you've forgotten almost everything, by the end of the 30 days, you would have remembered almost all of the content. So actually, forgetting everything between your sessions actually allows you to perform better if you would have a final test. And this is really important because most courses are cumulative, and that means that the content racks up and it builds upon each other. So if you were to have a final AP exam, you would actually benefit from distributed practice as opposed to massed practice and procrastinating. So how can you use this strategy for optimal benefits? That actually depends on how long you need to remember the information for. So it's approximately 10 to 20% of the interval between studying and testing. So to illustrate this with an example, if you need to remember something for a week, let's say it's 5 days, right? And if you multiply 5 days by the 24 hours each week, you would obtain 120 hours. If you were to multiply 120 hours by 10 or 20%, that would give you 12 and 24 hours. So to remember something for an entire week, you need to space each learning session apart by half a day or an entire day. And additionally, although this practice may not generalize to all contexts, meaning it may not apply to, like, for example, in the study it mentioned flying an airplane. People who like try to like navigate in an airplane didn't really benefit from this. However, if you were to use free recall, multiple choice questions, a lot of the strategies we talked about for retrieval practice, it would apply. Lastly, do not procrastinate. If you procrastinate, you basically cannot use this learning strategy. Okay, to wrap up, so this is an example of a study plan created with retrieval practice and distributed practice mixed together, which I will call distributed retrieval practice. So let's say you have a AP Psych biology test on Friday. On Monday, you'll go through the parts of the brain and the brain function. So for example, where the hippocampus is and the function of the hippocampus. On Tuesday, you would go over the neurotransmitters. So for example, the functions associated with a specific neurotransmitter and what happens if you have too much or too little of that neurotransmitter. Again, on Wednesday, you may go over all your drugs and the neurotransmitters associated with it. So for example, which category does alcohol belong to, and the neurotransmitters associated with the category. And lastly, on Thursday, you may do, so you've been practicing with these self-made practice quizzes for the entire week. On Thursday, you might just go find some practice questions on College Board or ask your teachers to assign you some College Board practice questions and just do them before the final test. And these are my works cited. So if you have any questions or if you want further information, you can go to any of these studies. So thank you for listening, and I hope you've learned a lot of information from this video.